scripture this morning is going to be John 19 through 22. And this is when, I believe, Pilate is talking about the kingdom of Jesus. It says, Pilate had a notice prepared and fastened to the cross. It read, Jesus of Nazareth, the King of the Jews. Many of the Jews read this sign, for the place where Jesus was crucified was near the city, and the sign was written in Aramaic, Latin, and Greek. The chief priests of the Jews protested to Pilate, "Do not write King of the Jews, but that this man claimed to be King of the Jews." Pilate answered, "What I have written, I have written."
Chromecast should be on. I think I'm going to grab the mic. So that we get to walking around a little too much. So this sermon is not really the sermon that was supposed to be preached today. It was supposed to be preached 4 months ago, and COVID happened. And so I was all ready to go, and I think it was literally like on a Thursday or something, the church board met, and the recommendation was to close church. And so a little disappointed in that, and a little excited about the message, and then to not be able to present it. But this is something that is, to me, when you do this sermon, you look at this, when you take some time, it's something that you almost have to feel. It's something that you almost have to imagine. And so it may be a little bit, out there for some. Me being such a concrete, practical person, sometimes it's a little more stretch for me to get my brain around the process, the imagination. But the purpose, the reason that we're here, and the reason I want to talk this morning, comes from Testimonies to the Church, Volume 4, page 374 to 376. And it goes something like this. His ministry was nearly completed. He only had a few more lessons to impart. And that they might never forget the humility and the purity of the spotless Lamb, the great efficacious sacrifice for man, was humbled himself to wash the feet of his disciples. And here's the important part, third line down. It will do good to frequently review the closing scenes in the life of our Redeemer. Here, behest with temptations as he was, we may all learn the lessons of utmost importance to us. It would do well to spend a thoughtful hour each day reviewing the life of Christ from the manger to the Calvary. We should take each point by point, let the imagination vividly grasp each scene, especially the closing ones on his earthly life, thus contemplating his teachings and his sufferings and infinite sacrifice made by him for the redemption of the race. We may strengthen our faith, quicken our love, and become more deeply in tune with the Spirit, sustained our Savior. Father God, as we look at the cross this morning, as we take a moment and imagine just a little bit what it was like for Christ to endure that, what it was like to have the Father watch, what it was like for Pilate to sit back and wash his hands of it all. Lord, I pray that we can do what White says here, and just imagine for a little bit what it was like to be on the cross. So I want to look at the cross from three basic perspectives this morning. The first one I want to look at is I want to look at the cross from a human perspective. The agony of love for the Father for the Son, And then I want to look at the cross from a medical perspective, because there's some very, very interesting things that happen while somebody is being crucified. The last thing I want to do is I want to look at Pilate. The view from a leader that had a bad decision thrust upon him. It was a while ago. I was in the Gibbon Parade, and I was in the parade riding a big bicycle. My great uncle Ed, some of you have met him, had a large collection of strange items, most of them historical. He had the largest collection of antique bicycles outside of a museum, probably at the time. And when he died, my dad inherited 2 of these antique bicycles. Big wheel on the front, little wheel in the back, about 120 years old. We're in the Gibbon Parade. We have some signs on that say Platte Valley Academy. I was about 13 years old. And I remember as the parade was being done, that the plan was to meet up maybe in the park or something. And for when the parade stopped to where the park was a little bit of a ride. And I kind of remember seeing the van, which bikes were the van, and I kind of remember thinking, like, where are they going? And so I was probably riding just a little faster than I should have. And I kind of remember thinking, man, I gotta keep going. And I specifically remember going to an intersection on the big bike, little wheel in the back, and then all of a sudden I remember diving out over the pavement. And that's about it. That's about all I remember. And then I remember the parade route guy right behind me happened to be a fire truck, ambulance, something like that. And so it was like basically immediate. There was a crowd of people around me with medical professionals that were like, "Are you okay? Are you okay? Can you hear me? Can you open your eyes?" Riding in the back of the ambulance, going to the trauma bay here at Good Sam, getting my jaw wired shut. Broke off a bunch of teeth. And I remember going to the dentist to get the teeth fixed. You ever broke off teeth and had to get them fixed? I mean, root canal is one thing, and that's a kind of a dead tooth, but these are healthy teeth. And so just to give you an idea, the root grows, or the nerve of the tooth grows up through the root, and if you break the teeth off, it breaks halfway off through the nerve. Half of the nerve will stay in the tooth. So you basically have a nerve ending with no sensors there. And so the process of getting 4 teeth capped is you got to make a mold to make a plastic tooth. And so, a bunch of grinding and a bunch of, stuff. Yeah, they're going to shoot the needle in your gum and it's going to hurt like crazy, and you're going to, the soft palate and the hard palate. But I was not prepared for the gel. They put this stuff on like a little metal plate that's connected to 2 hoses. And those hoses have water or antifreeze going to them. It starts out nice and warm and kind of like bubble gum. And then they pump ice cold water through the thing, and you can hear the machine kind of going. I'm like, that's not feeling so good. Like, it gets really, really cold, like almost frozen cold. And that gel then is the mold in which they make your tooth. 4 times. 4 times. 4 broken teeth. After the first time, I knew what was coming, and it didn't get any better. More needles, more pain, more drilling, the hot, the cold. And I remember sitting in the chair, and you sit in the chair and you kind of lean back, and then it starts to get a little tense. I'm like, you would really try to show that you were tense or nervous, but you get kind of stiff, and your legs would kind of get straight, and then you're like, okay, I need to relax. I'm not going to die. I need to just relax. And I remember looking out, if I looked straight down towards my feet, I could see the window out there, and I could see the trees kind of blowing in the wind. And I'm like, I sure would like to be outside right now. I think we went back to the dentist 2 or 3 times. I don't think they did all the teeth at the same time. Each time I went back to the dentist, the same thing would happen. You start to get kind of tense. You start to know what's going to happen. You know that pain is going to come. It doesn't have to be now when I go to the dentist, but I can still remember that point when it was Pain was happening. Pain was going to come. When I was 13, that was the most painful thing that ever had happened to me. And I voluntarily fixed the other 3 teeth, even though I knew it, because I wanted teeth. At Kearney Regional, we do a lot of orthopedics. One of the most common procedure we do is a knee replacement. Those of you who have had a knee replacement know that basically what happens with a knee replacement is they come in with a saw, they basically cut the bottom 5 millimeters or half an inch off of the femur and the other one off the tibia. Then they glue these titanium plates to it. You can see there in the picture, right in the middle of the joint is this kind of cushion, kind of polymer. It's an expensive plastic that's cross-linked and it's spongy just a little bit. It's designed to take a lot of abuse and a lot of trauma. Then when they wake up, the pain, the rehab, the fun begins. And it's not 24 hours, it's not 48 hours, it's not a week. It's about a month before people start realizing that this was not the stupidest thing they ever did. I mean, you wake up and this happens, there's no reset button. You know, there's no like, oh, I'm going to start over again. I don't want my knee replaced. No, you can't glue the old parts back on. And so the only path is going forward. I get that. I understand that. The thing that is so surprising to me is the people that come back and get the other side done. You know what it was to do the first side, and yet you're going to do the other side? Why? The journey is painful, but the goal is justified. Just like going to the dentist. The journey is painful, but the goal is justified. Think with me for a moment. Maybe it's not a knee replacement. Maybe it's not a capping of a tooth or a tooth replacement. But maybe it's something else. Maybe it's a divorce. Maybe it's a bankruptcy. Maybe it's getting fired from a job. Maybe it's getting incarcerated. Think about something that was purely painful, emotional and physical. Think about the moment when you had that pain. What did you feel like? Did you look forward to the time when it was done? Do you want it to happen again? Those people that have experienced quite a bit of trauma have this diagnosis of PTSD for a while. If you can imagine, if you're falling off of a roof, sometimes even getting close to the roof is painful. Sometimes getting on the first step of the ladder is painful. Think about that moment. Think about that dark time. Think about what it took to get life back together again. Think about it, anticipating. Does it make you feel a little bit like the event happened again? Think about that moment. Think about the distress, the agony, the sleepless nights. Think about it and ponder it, anticipate it, and now do it. Now say, I'm going to do that for somebody else. I'm going to go through all of that pain. Not because it's going to make me better, but because it's going to make somebody else better. Voluntarily went through the pain to make somebody else better. I want you to read with me Matthew 26:39. We have a picture up here where Jesus is in the Garden of Gethsemane. Jesus is with some disciples that are supposedly watching and praying. These are the people that he is going to later endure for the cross. He is later going to lay down his life for these people. Matthew 26:39. Going a little farther, he fell on his face. Going a little farther, he fell with his face to the ground. He didn't trip. He didn't fall. He didn't get on his knees and pray. Boom, his face was on the ground. Why was his face on the ground? Because he knew the pain that was going to happen. He knew it was going to be bad. And he prayed, Father, if it is possible, may this cup be taken from me. Yet not as I will, but as you will. If it's possible for me to avoid this pain, make it happen. But I am still submitting, Father, that if you want me to go through this, I will. Jesus is laying in the Garden of Gethsemane. His face is to the ground. He knows the agony. He knows what it takes to go through this. He knows. He anticipates. He has all of the knowledge of being God, but yet he is fully human. When you go to the dentist, and you finally get done, you have good teeth. When you get a knee replacement or a hip replacement or shoulder replacement, you come out with mobility and motion. You come out with less pain in the long run. When you go to the cross, there's no good outcome. Jesus is praying in the garden. He knows what's going to happen. He knows what's coming. He knows the evil. It's going to be painful both physically and emotional. He has the love of humanity that he is going to go through this, not because he has anything wrong, as he is perfect in all aspects, but he knows that he has to do this for us. He is full of emotions about this task. He has to go through with it. The mission has to be completed. But yet, there is no reassurance. He has no guarantee that at the end of this, the sacrifice will be accepted. Will it work? Will people understand it? Will people even know what it was for? He is here as fully God, but fully man. He feels the pain. He feels the pressure. And he knows the path that is set before him. Going back to the dentist and the knee replacement, we don't have the weight of the world on us when we go to the dentist or we go to surgery to get our knee replaced. That's what Christ had. Over the years, I've changed my idea of thinking about the cross and what it means. I got a book recently, and I can't even remember the name of it. I should remember the name of it, but right now I can't remember the name of it. But basically it is dealing with the relationship of the Father and the Son. And how does the relationship of the Father and the Son mean that he is fully man and fully God? Ty Gibson writes, it's a great book. I don't know why I'm blanking on the name of it. The what? The Sonship of Christ. Yes, very, very good. Ty Gibson took 500 pages and put it down to 130 or something like that. He says, I want it only the meat, none of the fluff, none of the garnish. It's the unmitigated sonship of Christ. And then when I had Caleb, when I had a family, when I had somebody who was dependent upon, I realized what it meant for Christ to actually go through this. The pain that he felt was felt by the Father. The love that God had for the human race to voluntarily bring his Son down here to have that happen. So I want to look at the cross from the human perspective. The pain, the agony, the suffering, the anticipation. But I also want to look at it from a physician perspective. You see, I do a fair bit of, every now and then I do some critical care. And I remember a 16-year-old girl when I was in Iowa, a 16-year-old girl came in. And I remember it was just kind of unlucky that, it was at 4 o'clock in the morning and, the accident happened at 7 p.m. and at 4 o'clock in the morning I'm on call in the ICU and I get the call from the fellow and the fellow says, hey, I'm bringing over a trauma patient, get ready. And that was it. This girl shows up, she is literally broken on the entire right side. Every bone on the right side of her body is broken. She has belly that's opened up from stem to stern because she has so much trauma in her belly that the swelling is so tight that the blood flow to the organs is prevented by the skin and the fascia. Her head is opened. She has an open craniotomy. Half of the bone is gone. She's got X-fixes on the leg where screws are drilled into the bones, into the pelvis, into the hip to keep the bones aligned so that the blood flow maintains to the foot. I'll never forget the case, not because of that, because of another complication issue that I learned a lot. The important part is she spent 1 month on the ventilator in the ICU. She spent 6 months in the hospital and walked away. No, we call it debilitating injuries. Every bone in her right side of her body basically was broken. And she lived to tell about it. You know how hard it is to kill a 30-year-old man? He would not die of diabetes, didn't die of COVID. He didn't have liver failure, didn't have leukemia, didn't have a car accident, didn't fall out of a tree. He was beaten to death. You see, the Romans had a great method of excruciating pain. They had the most painful thing that somebody can endure down to a T. There are a few theories about how you die when you're on the cross. The most probable idea is somebody that eventually suffocates. You see, when you're on the cross, the only way to endure it, the only way to survive it, is to somehow pull yourself up. The body would hang limp and struggle to breathe until your legs give us a little bit of pressure to relieve the pulling force on the lungs and the thoracic cavity. Sometimes the executioner would hasten the event, and they would break the legs of the victim by smashing the femur to try to prolong or try to push along the suffocating time and therefore speed up the death. So as you're hanging on the cross, you have broken legs, the femurs are shattered, the arms are outstretched, there's unbearable pain that has been through the torture, getting to this point. The physical pain, the physical stress, the physical trauma, where you have to calculate in your mind, is the pain actually worth a breath? Do I want to push up on broken legs just to be able to take one breath and continue life for a few more minutes? When the soldiers would drive nails into the wrist, they would pierce the bones between the radial and the ulnar bones, and they would go right through the in-between portion, so there was plenty of fibrous tissue and tendons and bones to hold up the victim. If you went through the hand, if you went through right here, all you have is connective tissue and fascia that would easily rip out. But going through the joints, going through before the joint, in the wrist right here, you would actually have to pierce the radial nerve. Radial nerve hurts a lot when you cut it, when you run a spike through it. You know, in the OR, we do a lot of monitoring of pain. And when someone's heart rate goes up, someone's blood pressure goes up, I can always tell the surgeon's tugging or pulling on a nerve or pinching a nerve, and the patient needs more anesthesia. Crucifixion involved more than just nailing somebody to a cross or tree. It was preceded by a 9-tailed whip with hard metal spikes or bone chips at the end of every strap. The executioner strapped the victim to a block of wood while the soldiers beat the victim with shards or tips from the whip. From the buttocks to the legs to the face. The bones would tear the flesh and rip the skin, the muscle torn away. Skin is about 5 times more sensitive than other parts of your body. When I put somebody to sleep for surgery, I've done it enough to know what muscle layers, what skin, what is going on in the surgery. Whenever you take a knife and you start cutting the skin, you're going to get tachycardia. You're going to get high blood pressure. The patient's heart rate will go up, and the anesthesia needs to be deeper. After being flogged by the nine-tailed whip, the victim had to carry the wooden beam to the place of Golgotha, or the crucifixion. The wood was not smooth and treated. It was splintered and jagged as a tree. The plank would move up and down the victim's back, shoving splinters into the open wounds. This continued after being nailed up on the vertical beam. The back rubbed against the beam. The hand rubbed against the splintered wood. What flesh was left was dug in by shards of jagged, exposed tree. The initial beating alone was enough to produce hypovolemic shock. Hypovolemic shock is a state where a person's blood volume is decreased by 20%. When the oxygen carrying capacity of your body is decreased by 20%, the heart pump begins to fail. It's a muscle like anything else. If it doesn't have oxygen, it won't pump. When it pumps less oxygen gets pumped through the blood. The blood has less oxygen carrying to the muscles. And shock ensues. Shock looks like dizziness, nausea, vomiting, confusion, tachycardia, feeling of impending doom. I had a patient just yesterday. I did a spinal anesthetic on, and the patient felt that panic of impending doom, of shock coming on. Pressure was going down, heart rate was going up. Panic mode ensued. At that point, all rational thought goes out. I mean, it was a full-blown panic attack by this patient. Since the body doesn't get enough oxygen while hanging on the cross, the natural physiologic response is to hyperventilate. Not being able to do so, the heart pumps harder, trying to overcompensate for the lack of oxygen. The heart goes into cardiac stress, and the heart has been even known to rupture inside the pericardial cavity. When a victim is hung on the cross, the knees are bent at a 45-degree angle. This forces a person to sustain the weight of their body with the thigh muscles. Doing this for 5 minutes is extremely painful, induces muscle cramps for hours or days. It's unimaginable. But survival demands that you do it, that you push up on your thighs even if the bones are broken, just to take a deep breath. Something specific happened with Christ when he was on the cross. John 19:34. The Roman soldiers didn't know about this. John 19:34. When blood stops moving, what happens? You take a test tube, you pull it out of somebody's arm with blood, and you tape it up against the wall. The heavy parts settle in the bottom. In the lab, we don't wait that long, about 30 minutes. We spin it real fast in a centrifuge, and then we can analyze the various components. But if you take a vial of blood and tape it on the wall, the very, very bottom will have the red blood cells, and they stack in formation, where all the red cells kind of stack in a big long thing like Michelin Man. They call that rouleau. The middle section will be where the protein is. That's where like the clotting factors and I'll call it your albumin and all that stuff. And then at the very top, we call that the buffy coat. That's how much fat is floating around in your blood at all times. That takes about 30 minutes for that to settle out. Blood that is not moving for more than 30 minutes will settle. Also clots. John 19:34. When they pierced his side, out came blood and water. He was dead. They pierced his side. Takebusho's cardiomyopathy is a syndrome where hypoxemia and stress, severe stress, enough stress, actually ruptures the left ventricle. It beats so hard that it actually doesn't get a chance to eject the blood, and it pops. When it pops, blood flows outside of the heart into the sac called the pericardium, and it sits there. And then it starts to separate blood on the bottom and the water on top. We looked at the cross from a human perspective. We looked at the cross from a medical perspective. One last thing I want to look at comes from John 19:15 through 18. It's a guy by the name of Pilate. H.M.S. Richards has the best commentary, and some of this is taken from them. But they cried out, "Away with him!" Pilate said unto them, "Should I crucify your king?" The priest answered, "We have no king but Caesar." And then he delivered him to be crucified. And they took Jesus and led away. And John says, they there, bearing his cross, went forth to a place called the place of the skull, which is Golgotha in Hebrew. And they crucified him. And two others too. And then Pilate wrote on top of the cross, and his writing was, "Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews." The title was written in Hebrew, Greek, and Latin. And this was a public place, so many people read the inscription. The chief priest went to Pilate and said, "Write not the King of the Jews." The chief priest, the one who said he cannot be king, said, "We don't like that. Write not King of the Jews." But this is what Pilate said. Very, very important. If you want to look at your Bible, just go turn there. John 19, verse 17, 18. And the chief of the priests said to Pilate, "Write not King of the Jews," but he said, "I am King of the Jews." Pilate answered, "What I have written, I have written." What I have written, I have written. He would not change a word. It was customary for the crucifixion to have above them the reason for the death, the reason for the crucifixion. It was on his headboard, and it was prescribed. The sentence in Latin is called the tertullius. This technical term is preserved here by John from the original Greek. What I have written, I have written. The Greek was the language of culture, Latin was the language of rulership, and Hebrew was the language of people. From the record of the trial of Christ, it is very clear that Pilate was convinced of his political innocence, but yet he sentenced him to a cross. Pilate was not interested in the religious charges. He did not care that the chief priest says he was not the king of the Jews, but right that he said he was king of the Jews. Pilate didn't care. He was just the judge. Step by step, Pilate was beaten back by the demands of the people. Point by point, he surrendered his effort to do justice and to save Jesus. Yet our Lord would surely not have been crucified had it not been for Pontius Pilate. Familiar words are ringing in our ears. Suffered under Pontius Pilate. Crucified, buried, and dead. And to the very end of the time, Pilate will always be known as the person who condemned Jesus to the cross. We know Jesus that came into this world to die for the sins of man, but yet he could not save himself. The Son of Man came not to be ministered unto, but be a minister unto others, as a ransom for many, as it says in Matthew 28. The purpose would be fulfilled. Yes, was fulfilled. His death might have been accomplished in various ways. He might have been stoned out in front of the palace, or might have been in the place of the Passover. He might have been assassinated in the Garden of Gethsemane when he was on his knees, face down in prayer. The whole council of his enemies were determined upon his death, one way or another. But it was Pilate who was given that task to put him unto death, to be crucified. John 19:16, why did he do this when he knew that Jesus was innocent? When even he proclaimed he was innocent. Jesus, you are innocent. I am innocent of this task, Pilate says. Jesus knew Pilate. Jesus knew Pilate well. And Pilate knew Jesus. Because wherever Jesus was, there was great crowds. And in Pilate's house, there was a great crowd. And there, the Roman authorities used to have spies to come in to infiltrate, to find out what was going on, to find the insurrection, and to be able to gain knowledge, to be able to report back to the Roman authorities. The work of the Savior had become a great issue in this land, and people were taking sides. Not so much unlike today. Herod also knew about this. As you know, Herod was the one who had Pilate sent Jesus in an effort to relieve him of this terrible problem. Because Pilate knew that the guy was innocent. But yet, Herod sent him back and said, Pilate, this is your problem. One other piece of the story that's very interesting. Was Pilate thinking when he was on that veranda with Jesus? Could he hear his wife's words ringing in his ears? Have nothing to do with this just man. Matthew 27:19. For I have suffered many things this day in a dream. What did she see in this dream? What was she telling Pilate? Did she see her husband condemning a man that that he himself had declared innocent and righteous? Did she see Jesus being whipped by Pilate? Did she see him being scourged the second time, or laid away and led away to be mocked and spit upon and beaten? Did she see the shadow of the cross rise upon a lonely hill? Or did she see another scene? The cloud of glory in the east growing larger and larger until it covered the whole heavens. Did she see the myriads of radiant forms in the last face-to-face had been marred now and disgraced? Did she see him coming in the clouds of heaven? Did she see the judgment scene where the Son of Man shall sit on his high throne in glory, and nations shall bow before him on the left and the right? We do not know what she has seen, but she suffered much. You see, God sent her to help Pilate. He gave him every opportunity. But he was afraid he would lose his political position. He was afraid to step out. He was afraid to call evil by its right name because of political pressure. He was afraid if he stood up. He was afraid if he said something, the crowd would turn against him, even though he knew it was wrong. Somehow, those words rang in his ear. If you let this man go, you are not a friend of Caesar's. His position would be gone. His ambitions would fall to the dust. Do you sympathize with Pilate? Do you feel just a little bit of the pain, the agony that he was weighing in the balance as Jesus was there being sentenced? Another scene. Pilate had to figure it out. He says, I know what I'll do. I'll give it up to the people. Bring this guy Barabbas. Yes, that's what I'll do. I'll send it to the people. They would never release a murderer called Barabbas. But the mob can be as cruel as the highest authorities. Louder and louder they shout. They shout, away with him, away with him. Pilate says, what evil has he done? I have found nothing wrong with him, nor Herod. Again the cry, away with him, crucify him, crucify him. That must have been a terrible feeling for Pilate. Sometimes we can gloss over it. But if we go into the eyes and we look at the cross from the view of Pilate, what is he thinking? What thoughts are in his head? Do we ever do that? protect our position, protect our job? Do we just cover it up? We're like, you know what, that's all right. We're just gonna look over that. I'm gonna go along with the crowd. Have we ever denied the truth because it was unpopular? Have we ever crumbled in our stand for God because it was hard to obey? Do we care? Do we dare cast the first stone on Pilate? Jesus, the King of the Jews. What did Pilate do? In a rare glimpse of ethics, he said, "What I have written, I have written. I'm not going to change it." Think about that. That is, in essence, what Christ is there for. Christ is there for on the cross. What I have written, I have written. You don't know what happens to Pilate. You don't know how it ends. But tradition says that he was later sent to Rome and then banished to rule in the far west. Some say that he committed suicide. It's not in the scripture, so we don't know. What we do know is he stuck by the motto, what I have written, I have written. And this brings to us a very important point. None of us can change the past. None of us can unwrite what we have written. None of us can unmark our character. Someday their record will be changed, and someday our record will be expunged. Someday it will be perfect and clean. Angels will read over the record. Universes will look at our record. The devil will look at our record. The record of our lives with all of our illusions and rationals stripped away. What I have written, I have written. It cannot be changed. It cannot be altered. However, the guy on the cross, for one event, saved the life of so many. Because when we accept that cross, when that blood hits our record, all of it gets wiped away, immediately covered up by the blood of Christ. What I have written, but not what Christ has written. So the question that we have to ask this morning is not what I have done, but what Christ has done through me. When we look at the cross, we can look at it from the human perspective. The pain and the suffering and the disconnect from God. We can look at it from the medical perspective. What it actually is like to kill a healthy 30-year-old man with no disease. A perfect, sinless man. And we can look at it in the view of Pilate with an inability to erase the past, to change what we have done. But that's not the question that we want to ask this morning. The real question we want to ask this morning is, like we started out in the very beginning, the thoughtful hour of looking at the cross, how are we changed? Because you can read it, you can study it, pretend to be Pilate, you can look at it from a medical perspective, you can look at it from a pain and suffering perspective, but unless it changes you, you miss the point. It will do good to frequently review the closing scenes in the life of our Redeemer. A view of the cross. We're going to close with one of my favorite songs. Number 159, The Old Rugged Cross. You can look at a lot of things in the Bible. You can look at a lot of scenes. You can look at a lot of analytical parts. Until you look at that cross and that makes you change, it's all a study of history. Let's sing The Old Rugged Cross, 159.
Yeah.
have taken a short bit of time, a thoughtful hour, to look at what the cross is about, to look at what the sacrifice costs, to look at the pain, the suffering. Lord, I pray that we don't just look at it, but as we talked about at Sabbath school, that looking at it, studying, understanding it, changes us.